news cycle.
Now is the perfect time for ABC News Live.
ABC News, straightforward.
Beirut blast. These images of a massive explosion circulating on social media, rocking the Lebanese capital, showing a mushroom cloud over the city and fueling questions what sparked this explosion. Tonight, dozens are dead and hospitals are overwhelmed with thousands of people injured. Tornadoes flooding down trees and torrential rain. Isaias makes its rampage up the East Coast. Millions without power tonight. Back to school, but not back to normal. The school debate raging from coast to coast, and the state seeing a surge in cases that's pumping the brakes tonight. And months after this pandemic began, how are first responders still struggling to get critical equipment? A report on what's being done to address a PPE shortage. Census concern. Conversation with the former head of the Census Bureau about just how damaging an undercount could be and what he says needs to happen. And the motivation we all need to get up and get moving. We could all use a little of that. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Right now, Isaias is pushing its way into northern New England as it marches on to Canada, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake, stretching from Puerto Rico to Boston and beyond. The storm made landfall in North Carolina as a Category 1 hurricane with winds topping 85 miles per hour, igniting several fires in beach communities in that state overnight. And when daybreak hit, the water rescues began up and down the East Coast. This was a scene in Maryland, just outside the nation's capital, where a man had to be rescued from those high waters. And on top of the flooding, Isaias also spawned tornadoes, including this one at the Jersey Shore. Lots to get to tonight, but Tom Yamas leads us off with the deadly trail of destruction from Isaias.
Tonight, the winds, rain, and storm surge from Isaias taking lives, carving the East Coast, and hitting major cities in the Northeast as a powerful tropical storm. Trees down across New York City, this one killing a 60-year-old man in Queens.
Strong and damaging winds from Isaias tore through parts of Brooklyn. A line of sycamore trees in this park split in half, the massive branches crashing down and crushing cars below.
The heavy rain quickly flooding roads and trapping drivers on Interstate 76 near Philadelphia.
They were scared, fighting because she thought she was going to drown.
Outside Washington, D.C., 2 cars with multiple people inside swept off the road, some clinging to trees, one on the roof. Teams rescuing them with rafts and an airboat. No one seriously hurt. And across the Northeast, multiple tornado warnings.
Hurry up, it's right here.
This funnel cloud spotted in Ocean City, New Jersey. And homes throughout this Delaware neighborhood torn apart.
But the really bad part of this area is this house right here. But the whole back house of the house is gone.
I saw the tree lifting up out of the ground. And at that point, that's when I saw the whole back of the house coming off of the property. First thought is, thank God that we're here. God spared my wife, and my boys.
Powerful winds from a likely tornado in Bertie County, North Carolina, flipping cars and splintering multiple homes. 2 were killed, 20 hurt. Tanisha Thomas was home with her daughter.
We made it in the bathtub, and I put my body over hers. That's when it hit. One day at a time.
Did you lose everything?
Everything.
East of Richmond, Virginia, homes knocked from their foundations. Isaias making a dangerous late-night landfall just north of Myrtle Beach as a Category 1 hurricane with sustained winds of 85 miles an hour. Those powerful winds drowning out our Rob Marciano on Carolina Beach. Plus, life-threatening storm surge flooding homes, burying cars in sand, and filling homes with debris. In Oak Island, North Carolina, residents riding out the ferocious winds and surging water in the dark.
House shook. First time I was in a house that ever shook.
Power lines sparking fires on Ocean Isle Beach, multiple homes engulfed, thankfully empty as most had evacuated.
Tom Yamas joins us now from Brooklyn. Set the scene for us, Tom. What happened when first responders first arrived at that collapsed building behind you?
Well, Lindsay, the wind started to pick up here in Brooklyn. This building collapses. Firefighters rush in. They realize nobody's there. That is the good news. Nobody was inside at the time, but the winds kept picking up and they realized all this debris could become projectiles. They shut off the block. Lindsay, luckily, nobody was hurt.
Good news there. Okay, Tom Yamas, thanks so much for your reporting. But in the meantime, millions of people are without power as Isaias continues its deadly run up the East Coast. The storm and the outages raising the question, where do you go when you have no power in the middle of a pandemic? Stephanie Ramos is in New Jersey, where more than 1 million people are currently in the dark.
Look at that.
Hurricane Isaias spawned water spouts along the Jersey shore and brought with it wind gusts of over 100 miles an hour. We started feeling it in Cape May, New Jersey, just after 9 a.m.
That washing machine feeling, that's what we're in right now. It actually just calmed down in the last 5 seconds, but the wind, the rain, the sand just really whipping around.
Those winds knocking down traffic lights, trees, and power lines, putting more than 3 million in the dark across the storm zone, more than 1 million just in New Jersey.
Should you have to go out and come across a downed power line, please immediately report it to emergency services.
Someone reported this sparking line, and while we were interviewing emergency manager Jerry Enderwise, it exploded. No one was hurt.
This is basically a result of the storm. Power lines down, causing fires and explosions in the neighborhood.
That's correct. So you saw what can happen.
Tonight, hospitals up and down the storm zone that were dealing with the coronavirus are now dealing with this storm too. These coastal communities, no stranger to powerful storms and all kinds of weather emergencies. But this time, it's different.
To say this is not an easy endeavor in the midst of a pandemic would be the understatement of the day.
Stephanie Ramos joins us now. We just heard the governor talking about this double whammy of dealing with the storm in the middle of a pandemic. Is that expected to slow down the process of restoring power?
That's very possible. The governor of New Jersey saying that the challenges electrical teams have faced is really the damage that they've seen all across this region. But these crews here, they're expected to be here through the night and into tomorrow until power is fully restored. Lindsay.
Stephanie Ramos for us on the ground there in Cape May. Thanks so much, Stephanie. Ginger Z joins us now. Ginger, thankfully this storm was not a Category 2 or higher, but still, what a trail of destruction left behind.
And really a unique storm to watch this thing race, and I mean bolt for the Canadian border. Remember, it was just less than 24 hours ago making landfall and now covering the whole East Coast. So it's racing still at 20 miles per hour to the north-northeast, and it's almost up at the Canadian border. It's up there, Burlington, Vermont, feeling some of the heaviest rains, those outer bands all the way through Maine and the Cape of Massachusetts. But just because it's dry behind the storm doesn't mean you don't have impacts. We're still seeing gusts of 30 to 60 miles per hour and will throughout tonight. But then we're going to say goodbye to this. I have to time it out for you because this is the best part. It all leaves after midnight. Most people are done, and we don't talk about Isaias at all any longer. So the moisture, both rain and, of course, the winds are going to lessen as we get into the early morning hours of Wednesday, and by tomorrow, it'll be all about cleaning up. Lindsay.
Glad to say goodbye to Isaias. Ginger, thanks so much. Now to the growing fears over reopening schools in the middle of this pandemic. Mississippi, which currently has one of the most severe COVID outbreaks in the country, unveiled plans today to reopen schools. Some are already back in session, and many schools nationwide open just for a few days, and they are already seeing new cases of the virus. Our Steve Osinsami reports.
In Mississippi tonight, where a handful of high schoolers have already tested positive for the coronavirus and where many children are already heading back to classrooms, the state's governor says he was forced to act.
Today, I will sign an executive order that requires the use of masks by all adults and all children in our schools, unless there is a medical reason not to.
He says he's also requiring face coverings for everyone in all public places, but only for 2 weeks. And he's delaying the start of in-school instruction, but only for older children and in areas with outbreaks. 98% of the ICU beds in his state have someone in them, and 1 out of every 5 people tested for the virus is testing positive, the highest rate in the nation. At the University of Mississippi Medical Center in Jackson, they ran out of beds in the ICU weeks ago.
Anytime a bed opens up, there are multiple patients waiting for that bed.
The death rate from the coronavirus across the country this week is 24% higher than last week, according to the government. 28 states are seeing an increasing number of hospitalizations. Outside Atlanta, hundreds of teachers are out sick. The Cranes family in Georgia sent their kids to school today with masks. The father says it was a difficult decision.
I'm a bit concerned. I heard on the first day, half of the children are wearing their mask, the other half doesn't.
I completed my work and everything went well, but I wasn't really happy with the people who weren't wearing masks.
In Phoenix, teachers concerned about getting sick are protesting.
How do we keep them 6 feet apart? And how do we keep them safe from each other?
Teachers in eastern Arizona have already lost a friend. Kimberly Lopez Bird was loved by her students, and her superintendent says he's concerned about reopening classrooms.
I'm scared that somebody's going to die.
Steve Osunsami joins us now from Atlanta. We're seeing pictures of crowded children in schools. What are parents who are making the tough choice to send their kids to school saying tonight?
Well, one thing we're hearing from parents is that they don't necessarily want to be judged for this decision, and that not everything is as it appears to some people. Some parents tell us that, they can't send their kids to daycare because the daycares aren't open, and they have essential jobs, so they need to send their children to school. And then there are other parents who are saying that they've decided for themselves that the risks and the precautions that are being taken to minimize those risks aren't enough, and that there is no reasonable parent who would do anything to purposefully harm their child. So this is a lot more complicated than some of those pictures that have been floating around the internet make it seem. Lindsay?
And Steve, also word late today of an elementary school class now quarantined there in Georgia.
That's right. There is a second grader in a Cherokee County grade school whose family has just learned that the student tested positive for the coronavirus, and school only started yesterday. And so what that means is that that child's entire classroom of 20 students and the teacher now have to quarantine at home for 2 weeks. And Lindsay, this school year is just getting started, and we expect to see much more of this.
All right. Okay, Steve Osunsami, thanks so much. And turning now to Washington, where President Trump appears to be downplaying the coronavirus outbreak in the U.S. despite more than 156,000 American lives now lost. But when pressed during an interview about the grim numbers, the president said, quote, "It is what it is," and insisted the virus is under control. Here's ABC's senior national correspondent, Terry Moran.
With his own task force members calling the pandemic extraordinarily widespread across the country, President Trump, in his HBO interview with Jonathan Swan of Axios, still insisting all is well and suggesting nothing more can be done anyway.
Right now, I think it's under control. I'll tell you what.
How? 1,000 Americans are dying a day.
They are dying. That's true. And it is what it is. But that doesn't mean we aren't doing everything we can. It's under control as much as you can control it. This is a horrible plague that beset us.
More than 156,000 Americans have died, far more than any country in the world. But the president keeps saying it's the testing that makes America look bad.
There are those that say, you can test too much. You do know that.
Who says that?
Oh, just read the manuals, read the books.
Manuals?
Read the
What
books.
manuals?
Read the books.
And charts in hand, cherry-picking statistics on deaths from the virus.
Right here, the United States is lowest in numerous categories. We're lower than the world.
Lower than the
lower
world?
than
What is that?
Europe.
In what?
Look.
In what?
Take a look. Right here. Here's case death.
The facts, while the U.S. has a relatively low death rate among those infected, case deaths, of the countries most affected by the virus, America has one of the highest COVID death rates per capita. But the president didn't want to hear it.
Oh, you're doing death as a proportion of cases. I'm talking about death as a proportion of population. That's where the U.S. is really bad. Much worse than South Korea, Germany, etc.
You can't do that.
President Trump, they're questioning the numbers. Terry Moran joins us now. And just to be clear here for our viewers on the numbers, the U.S. is not doing well on deaths compared to the rest of the world.
Not at all, Lindsay. The United States has failed in many fronts in confronting this pandemic, and on deaths, sadly, perhaps most of all. The United States leads the world in coronavirus death, 156,000, the next highest total. Brazil with 95,000. Mexico after that with 48,000. So the United States has just had so much more death because we have a pandemic that is basically out of control. Now, the president likes to point to the low number of deaths given the number of infections. In other words, we have X number of cases and just so many deaths, and that is lower than other countries because we do have a robust medical system. But as a percentage of the population, the pandemic has struck the United States harder than any country in the world, and it's our fault.
And the president also raised some eyebrows today by defending mail-in voting in his home state of Florida, despite his weeks-long attacks on mail-in ballots. But let's take a step back. I mean, what's the bigger concern about the president's messaging on this issue?
Well, for sure. First, it is rich that President Trump today said he wanted to make sure that mail-in balloting in Florida was known by the voters of Florida, a battleground state, to be safe and secure. He wants his mail-in ballots to be counted. But the bigger dangers is while he continues in other states to undermine and try to sabotage the legitimacy of mail-in voting, he will depress the number of voters. The whole point of having an election is to get people out to vote, hear what they have to say, decide who the winner is, and he is in the middle of a pandemic trying to discourage the legitimacy of mail-in voting. Republicans are upset at this. They understand that a lot of their voters, elderly voters and others, many others, will want to vote by mail. It'll take a while to count, but they are trying to get the president, certainly in Florida, to get the vote out by mail, because that's where a lot of it is going to come this time.
And the president, members of his family, members of his cabinet, many of them have said that they vote by mail. All right, Terry Moran, thanks so much. All right, and turning now to something all Americans need to complete and as soon as possible, the U.S. Census. In the middle of the pandemic, the Trump administration has quietly moved up the deadline to finish the once-a-decade survey. There's concern tonight that that could lead to an undercount. Joining us now is the former director of the U.S. Census Bureau, John Thompson, who served until June of 2017. Thanks so much for your time. Now, you ran the 2000 census and worked in the Bureau for 27 years. First off, for everyone who may not be aware, walk us through why the census is so important and why an accurate count of who lives where is so critical for our government.
Certainly. So the decennial census has a constitutional purpose to reapportion the House of Representatives. The data are used to draw national congressional voting districts, local voting districts. The results are used to allocate over $1.5 trillion per year of federal funding to various localities. And the census is just a valuable resource for state, city, and local planners, and businesses use it to make informed decisions about where to start companies, who to hire. The big issue is that if there are errors or undercounts or overcounts for that matter in the decennial census, then, and take 2020, for example, then those errors would be with us for 10 years until you could take the 2030 census.
And what do those errors mean in a very practical sense?
If you're an area and you suffer an undercount, then you will get less than your fair share of federal funds. You might not get your full representation in the Congress. So it has a real effect.
And obviously, it's a major challenge to conduct a census in the middle of a pandemic. Now, before COVID-19 hit, the count was supposed to be finished by the end of July. Well, the administration pushed that to October 30th, but then yesterday announced they were moving it to September 30th. Roughly 4 in 10 households still have not responded. So are you worried that they won't be able to count everyone within the next 2 months?
I am extremely concerned that the Census Bureau is going to be forced to cut corners or take shortcuts. Career people at the Census Bureau had initially laid out a plan that said we're going to need from April 11th to the end of October to do the enumeration, and then to do all the processing it takes to make the data available. They wanted to extend to April 31st of 2021.
Now, the Supreme Court denied the administration's attempt to add a citizenship question to the census, but recently the president issued a policy memorandum directing the Census Bureau to exclude undocumented immigrants from data used to decide congressional representation. You testified alongside other former heads of the Census Bureau last week. Are you worried this memorandum, regardless of its legality, will lead to an undercount of our most vulnerable communities?
So I'm very concerned that the issuance of that memorandum will increase the fears and concerns of many of the traditionally hard-to-count populations, that their data will not be kept confidential, and in return, they will be very difficult to get to participate in the 2020 census, and that will lead to undercounts.
And lastly, if we take a step back, obviously we're in unprecedented territory here with the pandemic, but if the Census Bureau numbers produce a U.S. population that's millions less than the 2010 census, what's the recourse here?
My former director colleagues and I have recommended that the Congress commission an independent and objective entity organization that can develop some metrics, if you will, or measures in advance of the 2020 census that can be used to determine if, in fact, the 2020 census apportionment counts are fit for use.
Mr. Thompson, we thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And when we come back, the unimaginable blast rocking Beirut, destruction throughout the city, the ongoing search for survivors, as so many are asking tonight, what happened? Is North Korea now able to put nuclear weapons on ballistic missiles? The new UN report that you need to know about. But up next, medical workers in this country still struggling to get PPE months after the first confirmed cases inside the U.S. How could this happen here? Learn about the outside group that's trying to help. Since the start of this pandemic, we have been talking about the need to protect our healthcare workers with proper PPE, personal protective equipment. Now, with coronavirus cases surging across the country, ABC's Will Carr takes a closer look at one group's fight to protect our healthcare heroes on the front lines.
For those working on the front lines, COVID-19 comes with an inherent professional danger.
It can be scary, so it's a scary moment every day.
Dolly Tapia is a nurse at a Sabin Community Clinic in Los Angeles.
We never know who's going to walk in through our doors, whether someone's infected or not, whether we're going to be exposed today or not.
At the beginning of the pandemic, doctors and nurses experienced a massive shortage of PPE, including those critical N95 masks. At a federal hearing in July, FEMA leaders laid out the challenges. hospitals.
In responding to COVID-19 and other national disasters in 2020, FEMA has met the more difficult task of managing finite medical supplies and equipment. Rather than managing resources, we are managing shortages.
ABC News has highlighted how at times hospitals and clinics were running out of their best line of defense.
I think the big thing that we need on the front lines right now is personal protective gear for my colleagues and myself.
The PPE shortage has touched every corner of the country as hospital administrations have been forced to stockpile resources. From California
What do we want? PPE! What do we need? Yeah!
to New York City, the original epicenter in the United States.
We are demanding that we get all the hoarded supplies that exist of PPE so that we can protect ourselves, our families.
To help, Direct Relief, a nonprofit based in Santa Barbara, California, is one of the organizations that has been shipping PPE, including those precious N95 masks, free of charge to more than 12,000 health clinics all across the country.
In addition to the mask, there's gloves, gowns, face shields, goggles, and face shields, hair coverings and shoe coverings. Those are the basic PPE items.
Direct Relief actually makes its own N95 mask to help during California's wildfire seasons. In addition, the nonprofit buys masks from 3M and other companies. So far, Direct Relief says it's distributed more than 13 million masks since COVID-19 broke out in the United States.
With the shipment that we just received from Direct Relief, it'll give us about 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the volume of patients that we receive.
And that's a huge help in a world where price gouging has made it difficult for clinics and hospitals to buy enough PPE to stay safe.
We know the N95 approved masks that we make, they cost under $1. So to have someone call and try to sell the same product that they were fortunate enough to snag for $8 was insulting and awful.
To combat that price gouging, Direct Relief is providing critical supplies to more than 30 million people.
We're really grateful for it because they donate gowns, they donate masks, they donate face shields, which is a huge need right now.
And Will Carr joins us now from the Direct Relief factory filled with PPE. We also know the federal government is stockpiling masks too, but there are issues.
That's right, Lindsay. The United States government is stockpiling masks, but according to the CDC, some are beyond their shelf life and now have to be studied to see if they can still be used. And even though we have that stockpile, there are some healthcare workers across the country saying, hey, we need these masks right now because we're still in the middle of a crisis. Lindsay.
And this group is not just helping people inside the United States, but abroad as well.
That's right. They deliver PPE to all 50 states, and you can see all of these flags here at the top of this warehouse. They also have been delivering PPE through this pandemic to 85 other countries, everywhere from Mexico all the way to Nepal and so many countries in between. Lindsay.
Will Carr, thanks so much for your reporting. And still ahead on ABC News Prime, stranded in paradise, the literal SOS that led to a South Pacific rescue. Also, stimulus stalemate with millions of Americans waiting for a lifeline. Are lawmakers any closer to an agreement? And more mail, more problems? Questions tonight about the future of the Postal Service. We go by the numbers. But first, our tweet of the day, Rafael Nadal saying he will not take part in the U.S. Open because COVID is out of control. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Amid this pandemic, an unprecedented number of Americans are expected to vote by mail in this upcoming election. This as the U.S. Postal Service is planning cuts that could delay mail delivery and cause even more chaos. With House Democrats this week calling for testimony from the Postmaster General, we take a closer look at the Postal Service by the numbers. 240 years we've had the U.S. Postal Service, with Benjamin Franklin serving as the first Postmaster General. Today, it's a $71 billion business that would be the 44th largest company in America if it were a private company. With more than 630,000 employees, the Postal Service is the second largest civilian employer in the United States. Last year, it delivered 143 billion pieces of mail. 90% of Americans think favorably of the Post Office, making it the #1 most popular federal agency. That's according to a Pew survey from last year. But for 13 consecutive years, it suffered net losses, and its leadership says its current business model is simply not sustainable. Still, lots to get to here on Prime. The warning tonight after this deadly blast. Lebanon's prime minister saying those responsible will pay as the death toll mounts. Our conversation with the man who wrote the articles of impeachment against President Trump. His thoughts as we get closer to Election Day. And the investigation now underway in Texas after the 5th soldier from Fort Hood has died since May. But first, here's some of the trending stories on abcnews.com.
Four people have been killed by tropical storm Isaias.
Trees down across New York City. This one killing a 60-year-old man in Queens. The heavy rain quickly flooding roads and trapping drivers close to Interstate 76 near Philadelphia.
They were scared, fighting because she thought she was going to drown.
Outside Washington, D.C., 2 cars with multiple people inside swept off the road, some clinging to trees, one on the roof.
Coronavirus cases are increasing in 15 states. Hospitalizations are up in 28, and deaths are on the rise in nearly 36 states.
President Trump claiming the virus is under control in an interview with Axios on HBO, despite the U.S. having around a quarter of the world's infections and deaths.
The United States is lowest in numerous categories. We're lower than the world. We're lower than
What is that?
Europe?
School districts around the country have been looking to the Trump administration for guidance on safely getting kids back in the classroom, but there is no specific national plan in place.
I'm sweating under this. I don't know how a 5-year-old is going to be able to handle it.
A teacher from Lake County, Florida, taking matters into her own hands, rigging her classroom with plastic dividers. In Arizona, teachers circling the state capitol in cars, protesting the state's school reopening plans.
How do we keep them 6 feet apart? And how do we keep them safe from each other?
Another round of talks for a new stimulus relief deal have hit a snag. The Senate Republican leaders say there likely won't be consensus to pass a bill.
A big reason there is still no unemployment extension or other COVID aid, the Senate Republican majority cannot settle on a plan.
There's not a whole lot of movement yet, but a feeling that seems to have been expressed that we'd like to get an outcome.
Senator Mitch McConnell saying it is likely he will need a combination of his own party and Democrats to pass any Senate extension, despite Republicans holding that body's majority.
If we don't spend the money that is needed now to help beat this crisis economically and health-wise, it'll cost us a lot more later.
This isn't the set of Castaway, rather a real-life rescue. 3 sailors stranded in the Pacific were saved after writing a giant SOS in the sand. The trio had been missing for 3 days, their alert message spotted by U.S. and Australian forces from the sky on a tiny island in Micronesia. They were met on the beach and are reportedly in good condition. Several famous Leos celebrating birthdays today. Former President Obama turning 59. His VP and 2020 contender Joe Biden called Obama his brother and friend. Former First Lady Michelle Obama sharing this throwback pic. Obama shares his birthday with Meghan Markle, who today turned 39. All the royals, including the Queen, sending their well wishes. And Arnold Schwarzenegger is back for his 73rd time around the sun. His ex-wife Maria Shriver and their 4 children by his side.
Welcome back. Hospitals in Beirut, already near the brink due to the pandemic, are overwhelmed at this hour after a catastrophic blast by its port rocked the city. The death toll continues to mount. Thousands are injured. The massive explosion that started in a warehouse housing more than 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate created a mushroom cloud that hovered over the city, which remains stunned tonight. Isaias Panel has the latest.
This was the moment an entire city shook to its core as a massive explosion erupted in Beirut port. The blast occurring around 6 p.m. local time. Eyewitness video showing a fire and a series of smaller detonations. Unconfirmed reports suggesting perhaps fireworks. But what happened next was far bigger. A devastating explosion, sending a mushroom cloud across the city. The fronts of buildings ripped off. Cars, shops, apartments shattered. The streets showered with debris for miles around as bloodied and shell-shocked citizens staggered through blackened streets.
Hospitals are overwhelmed with casualties. The Lebanese health minister saying scores are dead and thousands injured. The healthcare system already overwhelmed by rising COVID infections and an economy in freefall. Tonight, the questions begin about what caused the blast and who's responsible.
Certainly lots of questions remain, and Isaias Panel joins us now. Ian, this could not have happened at a worse time for that city's health services. What can you tell us about the situation right now?
Yeah, that's right, Lindsay. You've got to pity poor Lebanon. It's in the middle of a coronavirus crisis that it's struggling to keep up with. It's in the middle of economic freefall. It's struggling to even keep the power on in the hospitals to keep its citizens fed. And now it's had this huge explosion. Lots of questions about what caused it. But the scenes have been absolutely incredible. It appeared that there was a fire at this building down in the port area. And then moments later, this was captured on multiple videos by eyewitnesses. You see this enormous explosion, by far the largest explosion I've ever seen. It sends debris across the city. The fronts of buildings are blown out. Cars are destroyed. People are killed. Many, many have been injured. Thousands injured, scores killed. And the destruction just goes on and on. The blast apparently was felt as far away as the island of Cyprus. Now, that is almost 200 miles away by sea. It shows you quite how intense it was. The U.S. Geological Survey reporting that it was a magnitude 3.3.
Oh, wow. And what more do we know about the cause?
Well, President Trump has been speaking and suggesting that it was an attack. Now, that has not been suggested by the authorities in Beirut. And we know this is a country at the moment. There are heightened tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. There are heightened tensions because we're getting an important judicial ruling coming up about an assassination of a former prime minister. But what the country's interior minister has said is that highly explosive material may have been kept at the site, later suggesting that it was ammonium nitrate. Now, ammonium nitrate is a key ingredient in a lot of homemade bombs, IEDs, improvised explosive devices, but also larger devices. The Oklahoma City bombing, for example, perpetrated by Timothy McVeigh, the main constituent element in that, again, was ammonium nitrate. Now, if it was stored in sufficient quantities, then perhaps that could explain it. And what we're looking at is not a conspiracy, but just a terrible, terrible, tragic accident in a country that is struggling to keep its head above water. I think the question tonight will be, is this going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back in Lebanon? Does it tip the country over the edge, or does it actually send a signal that now is the time to pull itself together, for everyone to come together and unite? We've just got to wait and see.
Got to wait. Okay, Ian, panel, thanks so much for your reporting. And those images of a mushroom cloud in Beirut, an indirect reminder of the dangers and horrors nuclear war could bring. After beginning his term going after North Korea's Kim Jong-un, even taunting him with words like Rocket Man, the president made bold attempts at charting a new path with the isolated nation. But two failed summits and a dramatic meeting at the DMZ has yielded zero progress when it comes to denuclearization. Now, a new UN report is reportedly revealing that North Korea has probably developed the capability to put nuclear devices on ballistic missiles. Joining us now is former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and ABC News contributor Stephen Ganyard. Steve, if this report is accurate, what does it mean potentially in terms of our ability to contain North Korea?
It means that we've failed. And when I say we, I say every president for the last 20, almost 30 years. Mr. Trump tried one approach. It has failed. The presidents before him, both Democratic and Republican, have tried more consistent approaches, and they have failed. We've known that the progress on the North Korean nuclear regime has continued, and now that we have this UN report, we have almost independent verification that we believe that they've miniaturized, in other words, taken a nuclear weapon and made it small enough that it can go on a rocket that theoretically could reach the east coast of the United States. And so the answer to your question is we have failed, and the world is a much more dangerous place.
And talk to us for a minute about actually being able to put miniature nuclear weapons on a ballistic missile. What does that mean in terms of where they may now be able to potentially strike?
Yeah, for any country to be able to have the capability to have nuclear weapons and to threaten other countries with nuclear weapons, they have to have several things. One, they have to have the rocket. So you have to have a rocket that can go a long way. Then you have to be able to take that nuclear weapon and make it small enough and light enough so that that rocket can travel far distances. We've seen the first two out of the North Koreans. What we haven't seen out of the North Koreans is the ability to survive re-entry. So the heat that's caused on re-entry, we saw the Dragon SpaceX capsule come down just a couple days ago. It's the same idea. When it re-enters the atmosphere, it gets very hot, and it's very, very difficult to have the metallurgy and the capability to survive re-entry. The fourth thing that the North Koreans have yet to demonstrate is the ability to target, to put that nuclear weapon somewhere in the area or the vicinity that they wanted to land. So we've seen the first two, and those are probably the most disconcerting because they can continue to threaten us. We have to accept their bluff. If it's a bluff, if they say we've got nuclear weapons and we can put them into South Korea or we can put them into San Francisco or Chicago, we have to accept that on face value because we have seen that miniaturized warhead, and we have seen the performance of the rockets theoretically able to reach the east coast of the United States.
Let me ask you this. Do you think it's a bluff?
I think there are parts of it that are a bluff. I don't think that they have the ability to do reentry, and I don't think they have the ability to target. But, in horseshoes and hand grenades, close counts. Right. And so in this sense, it's something that we have to take seriously. Mr. Kim is using this to defend the regime. So we say always, what is the intent of the Kim regime? And that is survival. And so they believe that having a nuclear weapon will prevent any kind of an invasion from South Korea, any kind of pressure from the United States. and it will ensure the continuity of the regime, because that is foremost on their agenda.
Now, North Korea has not conducted a nuclear test since 2017, but just last week, Kim Jong-un said there would be no more war because the country's nuclear weapons guarantee its safety. How could they make advancements on their program in spite of the sanctions that we have in place?
Yeah, you know, up until a couple of years ago, there were African nations that were more sanctioned than North Korea. The sanctions on North Korea are not that hard. And then you have countries like China that regularly trade and bust the sanctions. So Chinese ships are constantly trading coal and goods and shipping oil into North Korea. So the sanctions are so porous that they really, all they do is make life difficult for the North Koreans, but it really doesn't stop them from their weapons program. Remember that the other intent of their weapons program is to make money. They work very close with the Iranians, and they export their capabilities. We don't know yet, but we assume that they're exporting nuclear capabilities and rocket technologies to Iran, and they get cold, hard cash for that. And so that's what they're doing. They're out on the black illicit market around the world selling these things, but the sanctions that are designed to stop that or prevent that are as loose as a sieve.
Loose as a sieve. Okay, thank you so much, Steve Ganyard. Always appreciate your insight. Thanks so much.
Sure, thanks.
Texas authorities are now investigating the 5th death of a soldier from Fort Hood since May. Authorities say Francisco Gilberto Hernandez Vargas died in a boating accident just weeks after another soldier was found unresponsive in the same area. The death is now under investigation, and officials have not said that any of the deaths are related. We're also learning more tonight about that tragic Navy accident off the coast of Southern California. The Navy announced it has located the amphibious assault vehicle that went down during a training accident last week. Of the 16 people on board, 8 are presumed dead, and 8 Marines were pulled from the water. 1 died in the hospital, and 2 others remain in critical condition tonight. And we now take a look at President Trump in the crosshairs and how he's been investigated, sued, and impeached all since taking office. We speak tonight to Norm Eisen, impeachment counsel to the House Judiciary Committee and author of A Case for the American People, the United States versus Donald J. Trump. He was also President Obama's ethics czar and a former ambassador. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. So glad to be with you.
So you helped write the 2 impeachment articles against President Trump. You reveal in your book that you had drafted 10 articles before narrowing the focus to the Ukraine affair. Do you think anything would have changed if you had cast a broader net?
I used to believe that if we had cast the broadest possible net, it could have made a difference. And then I spent 2 weeks on the floor of the United States Senate as counsel, one of the counsel to the House managers for the impeachment trial. And I saw that despite the overwhelming proof of the 2 strongest possible articles that the president had extorted and shaken down Ukraine to attack his political adversaries in our American elections, despite that evidence, and even admitting that we had proved a quid pro quo, those senators, with the brave exception of Mitt Romney, were not willing to convict the president. So, unfortunately, I have concluded that it does not make a difference. It's up to the American people, and that's why I wrote this book.
And curious, because you just brought up Mitt Romney. He was the only Republican senator to vote for Trump's conviction. Did that surprise you at the time? And looking back, could the Democrats have done anything differently to achieve a more bipartisan outcome?
The decision of Mitt Romney was not a complete surprise. The biggest surprise is I report my behind-the-scenes conversations with Mitt Romney. As he struggled with the issues, he struggled with his conscience. You could see him doing it, and he gradually came around. The book is also full of mistakes that I made. I made more than my share along the way. I suppose if I had made fewer, it could have made a difference.
Former National Security Advisor John Bolton refused to testify at the impeachment trial, but later accused Democrats of, quote, impeachment malpractice for not investigating Trump's dealings beyond Ukraine. Bolton had also said that Trump had asked for China's help in the election. How do you respond to Bolton's accusation?
The book includes the 10 previously secret articles of impeachment, and we describe the investigation along the way. So what John Bolton says is just not true. We did investigate very broadly. I write about the evidence that we discovered, including startling new evidence that the president colluded, that we heard from the president's own former allies, that the president did collude with Russia. So that and much more evidence would have been completed if John Bolton had come in and talked to us. And we begged him to do it. Everyone knew we were investigating broadly. Ultimately, it's John Bolton's fault. I explain in the book why we could have gotten more articles of impeachment if only he had stepped forward, and we could have blown open the impeachment trial in the Senate, had even more witnesses if only he'd stepped forward. If there was any malpractice, it's John Bolton's malpractice with respect to his constitutional duty, his responsibilities as an American. Instead, he chose to put it in a book and cash in. That is reprehensible.
And is that what you have concluded is the reason that he didn't step forward, just to put it in a book?
I think he did it for the worst and really, I'm sad to say, the most un-American of reasons. It wasn't just money. He was clearly interested in the big payday. I've come to the conclusion that the reason John Bolton refused to cooperate with us, and he could have proved almost every one of those 10 articles of impeachment that I reveal for the first time that I drafted, Bolton chose not to step forward and help us prove those articles of impeachment and defend our country because he didn't want to work with Democrats. Shame. The book is full of stories about how we tried various ways to get him to cooperate. We extended a bipartisan hand to him to ask for his help, and he refused to do it. I believe the real explanation is he was willing to take a subpoena from the Republican majority Senate, but he wouldn't cooperate because of party. That is wrong. That is not what America is about.
Last question, but it's really a two-parter because I'm interested in piggybacking on what you just said. You said that Bolton could have proved every one of those articles. First question is, would that have even made a difference anyway? Second part of the question is, if Trump wins re-election this fall, do you think that the Democrats could try to impeach him again? And if they do, what lessons do you think that they have learned from the first impeachment?
The role of Bolton was explained to me by a very senior person, someone who is a Trump appointee, a very conservative Republican who said to me, if there's one man in Washington, D.C. who can flip these Republicans and get them to support impeachment, it's John Bolton. So that's the difference that John could have made if he had stepped forward. And you know, I think that the book has lessons that would apply to any future proceedings, not just against President Trump, but against other presidents. And they're also important lessons because I believe that President Trump is not, if he loses, going to go peacefully from the White House. I think he's going to fight with every tactic and all the energy that he has. And the book is a blueprint to what he's going to do and how to respond to it. He is going to use the legal system and distort the legal system. He's going to lie. He's going to get Bill Barr. Every scandal in the book, I take you behind the scenes. Bill Barr, if Trump's the commander-in-chief, Bill Barr is the enabler-in-chief. But now the difference is the American people are awake. And they're aware. We're seeing that in the polls. They don't like what they see from the president. And it's going to take the biggest lesson of the book. It's called A Case for the American People. I'm arguing in the book to the American people that it's time for them to act. And I think the public is behind accountability for Donald Trump now. It won't have to wait for a second impeachment. They're going to deliver their final verdict in November, I believe.
Ambassador Eisen, we thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And coming up next, meet the 6-year-old packing quite the punch. Stay with us.
Faster, just a little bit faster. There you go.
Sometimes the smallest among us packed the biggest punch. Now the motivation we all need to get up and get moving.
Let's go. Don't leave no window. Yeah, good.
As some of us get out of quarantine and look to get back in shape, take a look at this champ, 6-year-old Ruby Tucker.
Again.
Dominating those jabs and hooks, uppercuts and crosses. Her father coaching her every step of the way. Ruby started boxing when she was just 2 years old. She says she loves doing it because she gets to spend time with Dad.
There she goes.
Very impressive there. And before we go tonight, our image of the day. General Charles Brown is sworn in as the new Air Force Chief of Staff, the first African-American service chief in U.S. history. The decorated pilot and commander was unanimously confirmed by the Senate, and today President Trump called his rise an amazing achievement. That is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and good night.